Hello anybody, and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards. I'm Mr. Devious, or just Deeb, and in the last episode, we started the game, did the first 2 levels, and in today's episode, we are going to be continuing on through Popstar in our quest to recover more Crystal Shards. So, there's Big Castle in the background, and not really a spoiler, this is King Dedede's castle, because King Dedede is the self-proclaimed king of Dreamland, and we saw some crystal shards land near his castle. This actually doesn't happen in-game, you don't see it in-game, but that's my take on the story. So immediately, why don't we start with a few new power-ups? You combine fire and bombs, because this game does have combining power-ups, and you get fireworks. That is just awesome. This ability does coverage over a large area and is generally one of the more useful abilities in the game. In fact, if I were to speak, quite frankly, I would say a lot of the fire power-ups tend to be like the fire combination power-ups tend to be the most practical and useful that I can think of. So we come to this big sparkly castle and we run on ahead. Now, as I was saying in the last episode, Kirby 64 is the final game in the Dark Matter trilogy, which were 3 Kirby games that were by, just a moment, let me get the name here, Shinichi Shimomura is the one who directed the Dark Matter trilogy games, and they're different in a few ways. As we discussed in the last episode, they're different in how they handle power-ups and how they're more about augmenting singular power-ups than they are about a wide diversity of complex power-ups, as most Kirby games are. But there's also something in the aesthetic that I can't quite put my finger on, and I think it's that Kirby 64 and the other Kirby games, they feel a little more dreamlike, a little more surreal. They seem to take advantage of the whole Dreamland thing. Whereas the other Kirby games, I'm not sure what it is about them that makes them different. But maybe we'll see more of that as we go on, and maybe I'll be able to clarify my thoughts a little more. Now, we're done with this power-up, because I'm going to be showing off a new power-up. This is Cutter. You throw a cutter, and you throw a piece of your face, and you walk around as a pink sausage. And you can't jump very high, so you have to be careful, because while that thing is in motion, it does do a lot of damage, but you're very vulnerable. Also, one thing I like about Kirby games is that unlike a lot of Kirby games... Wait, can I not aim it down and break that? That's problematic. Well, I better find something to combine that with. But yes, you cannot stay in the air while you are walking around as a pink sausage. Now we need something to augment our cutter to make it a little bit better about hitting other enemies. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get that, but not this guy. And he stabs us in the face. What a jerk. His shield is for naught, though, and I see that crystal shard in the background, but we'll get it in a moment, a little bit later. First, we want to let that enemy run into that, and that double of power-ups our cutter, and that turns our face into a giant spinning blade of death. As I was saying in the last episode, when you combine power-ups that are the same, it's simply, usually, almost always, a bigger version of whatever you had before. Hi, Adelaide. Adelaide? I think it's Adelaide. So that's how we get that how we get that crystal shard, because as I explained in the last episode, and as you should remember, power-ups are color-coded, and you can find out what blocks are destructible by which thing. Did I almost miss this crystal shard again? No, I got it. Generally speaking, it's not too difficult to find out where the crystal shards are and what power-ups you need in order to get them. You just need to search around a little bit. Kirby secrets have never really been too difficult to find in games. It varies from game to game. In some Kirby games have particular moments that are just outright weirdly hard. I can't think of any game in particular, or any moment in this game that's like that. But because a lot of the puzzles rely on you having a certain power-up at a certain time, it means that there's a lot of moments, there's a lot of places in the game where you're required to get a power-up long in advance and then keep that power-up for a long time without losing it in order to get a specific crystal shard, which, because certain areas are better for certain power-ups than others, that's where some of the challenge can come from. But it's nothing too outrageously difficult. Kirby has a great climbing animation, it's kind of silly. This game has a lot of simple models, but I think it still looks good, as should any late Kirby, or any late N64 game still looks pretty good, especially when stylized. And here's King Dedede. And now Kirby is possessed by dark matter as Adeline and Waddle Dee were. Now this is actually a bit of a it is a callback to the other Kirby games, because in Kirby's Dream Land 2 and Kirby's Dream Land 3, one of the last bosses was basically just Dedede possessed. So ow! His hammer hurts, and he has some pretty vicious attacks. Again, I'm trying not to kill these bosses too fast just to show off their moveset. And you hit him a few times, you knock out his health bar, but that is not enough. And he floats in the air. What's he doing? He reigns back his health, and oh, that's just a little bit terrifying. And I died. First death. That's just great. And I don't have a power-up. Kind of a rule of thumb about most boss battles in Kirby games is they're a lot harder if you don't have a power-up, and that's usually because then the flow of battle is dictated by the boss, because the boss, you can only attack the boss by how often they use attacks that give you ammo to shoot back at them. However, with a power-up this fight is very easy, but I'm being very sloppy. Ah! See, this is giving me flashbacks to my Kirby's Dream Land 1 LP, where I just got rocked by King Dedede. But I don't really have an excuse to be getting rocked this time, because he's not even a big boss. At least, in Kirby's Dream Land, I was playing on hard mode. But no, I'm just not doing very well. This is embarrassing. Okay, Dedede, turn around, use a move. He's a bit slipperier, more slippery than he usually is in this game. And he goes flying in the air, and he does his terrifying moves where he has an eyeball coming out of his body, and he has these things chasing us around. That's just a little bit horrifying. He doesn't have too much health, though, and that's kind of the opposite of what we're used to. I do kind of like how this is basically, this would be like the penultimate boss in all the other Kirby games, the Dark Matter trilogy games, all two of them. But here it's just a mini boss, and that's horrifying. That's the other move he kind of does, where he just chomps his teeth. So yeah, Dark Matter turns things horrifying. And we take care of that. If you suck up 2 items at once and then spit them out, they'll do much more damage and pierce through enemies. King Dedede is defeated, and we get the crystal shard he was trying to hoard for himself because he's kind of a jerk. His faithful servant props him up. And we continue on our way. King Dedede has no need for friends. Nah, he's coming along. This is kind of in that period where King Dedede is transitioning to more of a hero role from the villain role that he's been used to in the past. Dedede in general just has never been much of a big villain. Now, while it is kind of smart for me to get that tomato, I'm going to get this card. I'm not going to tell you what it is, though. I'll save that for later. It's something trivial. It's no big deal. But King Dedede has he's not been a genuine villain in a long, long time. And the games have always kind of portrayed him as more of a jerk with a heart of gold than a genuine bad guy. And we have our full team now. We are all assembled, and we are ready to take on Whispy Woods, because the boss of every Kirby, the first boss of every Kirby game, has to be some style of Whispy Woods. It's not literally every Kirby game, but most Kirby games. And he's the first boss of every Kirby game in the Dark Matter trilogy, at least, and most Kirby games outside of it. So first boss, and we're fighting. We just killed his children, by the way. Those were Whispy Juniors, his saplings. Now he's going to shoot his roots out at us. But Whispy Woods is generally, except for like extra mode in the original, and modes where he's deliberately made more powerful, this guy's not a big deal. He shoots out his roots. You shoot the roots. He's all steaming and hot. Now, when he shakes out these, it's a good idea to try and suck up 2 apples at the same time, but you don't have much opportunity to do that because they disappear after a couple seconds, so it's usually just better to go to take the hit, but you can make this fight go a lot faster if you can get 2 of these apples together. But this fight dictates how the boss fights for the rest of the game will go. There's a first phase that's generally pretty easy, but then once you wipe out the first health bar, they transition into a second phase, and that's pretty cool. Now that we have 2 put together, though, we can finish off Whispy Woods once and for all. Now, even though that only did 1 damage per hit, it pierced through and hit both 2 roots, And that did our job for us, and Kirby is tired, but that is okay because we get the big crystal shard from Whispy Woods. And that is the end of Popstar. So what does the crystals do when we gather enough together? We got all of them on Popstar. It reveals the next world in the galaxy. And we all agree that we must move on to this crumbly planet in the rocks in the sky. And we fly off into space. Now, it's never really quite clear in the early bits of what's going on. Like, in the early parts of the story, what exactly is going on. All we know is dark matter went to a planet full of fairies, and, by the way, our fairy companion is named Ribbon, went there and destroyed a crystal. We don't know why they destroyed the crystal, but maybe we'll find that out later. Now, this is where you kind of learn, if you played the first two Kirby games in the Dark Matter trilogy, what this game kind of does with the story, is it goes on a massive scale. Kirby Dream Land 2 was kind of in a small area. Kirby's Dream Land 3 was the entire planet of Popstar, and Kirby's Dream Land Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. Dark matter is infesting entire planets. It is spreading far and wide, and we are taking our fight to other planets, and the second world is a desert level. How about that? Well, let's just answer that with a new ability. We are now Spiky Kirby, or Needle Kirby, so that's fun. If you combine two needles together, you can become really Spiky Kirby and get a whole bunch of silly objects attached to you with pointy appendages. That's a little bit ridiculous, but I'm gonna eat this sandwich and get some health back. Generally speaking, this move does offer a lot of coverage and it gives you a lot of range, as do most double power-ups. But generally your strategy is to hop along and impale things along the way, and that's about all there is to it. It's simple, but it's effective, and that's kind of the feeling I get with a lot of power-ups in this game. Now, some power-up combinations are pretty useless, and we haven't really gone into any of those yet, but we'll see them as we proceed throughout the game. Now we got some cake in a desert, and we are going to eat that up, because that is delicious. So as we go through this desert world, and we have all these new enemies, there are a lot of enemies in this game that actually don't really have a lot going for them, by which I mean they don't have power-ups, so they have no hope at fighting. There are also a lot of rooms in this game that are just kind of, you have a lot of range to jump up as high as you can, but usually you won't find anything. The Kirby 64 is pretty good about not hiding stuff just off-screen and making you rub your face against things. But generally there are hints, like if there's a big room and there's stuff up there, there might be something up there, as you saw right there with that crystal shard that we just got. Now I'm tired of this power-up, so I'm going to get rid of it, and we're going to use a new power-up. We're actually going to need this power-up. This is Stone Kirby. In most Kirby games, the stone ability just turns you into a boulder that drops and usually is used to pound pegs, but in this game, it allows you to turn into a golem of yourself. You are mostly invincible. You're invincible to most enemies and most attacks, but it's pretty not great against bosses and mini-bosses, because you'll get knocked out of this form if you walk into them. However, that little explosion of rocks is your attack, because the rocks that fly off you, the shrapnel, is usually enough to get the job done. Now this giant cactus boss, it just summons cactuses at you. You might have noticed this is a pattern with mini-bosses, and I can't remember if this is like all the mini-bosses or just the early ones. So what we want to do is we want to keep popping our rock on this guy. Now we could switch to a needle power-up and possibly have an easier time, but we actually want to save this rock ability, because we're going to need it to get a later crystal shard in this level. I've been practicing, and I know that it's there. So we're in a room, and the door closes behind us, and of course it starts to fill with sand, because why are there always traps in deserts and rooms that fill with sand? It's not cool. Not that there's any real pressure here to really move super fast, because you have plenty of time to stay ahead of the curve and just keep at your own pace and just get that done. More mouths open up, pour more sand in here. I got hiccups. That's a little bit silly. I don't think I mentioned it yet, but enemies can knock the power-up out of you if they hit you enough times, and that's one way that sections that make you hold a power-up for a long time to get a certain crystal shard, that's one of the difficulties, is just not even getting it knocked out of you. But I digress, this area is almost filled up, and we are doomed if this place floods with any more sand, but that's okay. Because Waddle Dee is our friend, and he pops a hole in the ceiling and allows us to get out. This is generally what our friends do. They just show up from time to time, help us get out of sticky situations, and also help us get crystal shards. but we'll be seeing more of them as the game goes on. These are Scarfies! Generally speaking, in Kirby games, if you try to suck up a Scarfy, they'll turn into a monster and chase you. In this game, all it takes is turning your back to them. I think trying to suck them up will permanently aggro them, but I can't remember. They're like boos in this game, though, but I like boos, so it's okay. They are generally horrifying enemies, though, and we roll down a hill. Now, you might have noticed a wall that I kind of ignored that was kind of a weird color. It was brown, but it was also yellow. And what do we know about brown and yellow is that is the power for rocks and electricity. Now, you want to be careful in throwing your power-up at this guy because, well, you can have your power-up easily destroyed in trying to combine it with another enemy, and there's nothing more frustrating than carrying your power-up throughout a level, trying to combine it, and then blowing it up. So now that we have lightning and rock, what could this make? A lightning boulder that bounces around you and does a lot of damage. Actually, this wrecking ball of lightning and rock is very useful, and it's one of the most... I'm not sure if it's one of the most powerful, one of the most useful things in the game. It's kind of hard to tell when there are, like, no enemies around, but that the electrical chain does damage. It's kind of unpredictable, though. It does a lot of range. Covers a lot of range, kills a lot of enemies that get in your way, can keep you covered from a safe distance, but it's unreliable in terms of like getting it where you want it to go. But we got through the desert and we get to have ourselves another picnic. And King Dedede's just eating chicken. I'm going for that card. And that is that. However, I think that we've made enough progress in this episode. We got through the rest of Popstar and we started on Stone Star, or Rockstar. I'm a Rockstar. And we got through there, but I do believe we will be saving more of the game for the next episode. We will be continuing on through Rockstar and doing the next couple levels. So, if you want to see more of Kirby 64 The Crystal Shards, then I just hope to see somebody in the next one. Bye-bye!